In my first year of the second term, should be my third term, but strange things happen. I am officially announcing the war on fraud to be led by our great Vice President J.D. Vance. And if we're able to find enough of that fraud, we will actually have a balanced budget overnight. It'll go very quickly. Isn't that a shame? You should be ashamed of yourself not standing up. You should be ashamed of yourself. That is why I'm also asking you to end deadly sanctuary cities. They want to cheat, they have cheated, and their policy is so bad that the only way they can get elected is to cheat. And we're going to stop it. We have to stop it, John. These people are crazy, I'm telling you. They're crazy. We're lucky we have a country. With people like this, Democrats are destroying our country, but we've stopped it just in the nick of time.
Those were some of the highlights from President Trump's State of the Union address, a speech that was full of false claims and angry attacks. The question is, how did he address the affordability concerns that millions of Americans have? That issue was a core message in the Democratic rebuttal from Governor Abigail Spanberger of Virginia. The question is, after a record-long State of the Union address, did anyone stick around to hear it? Plus, we'll dig into the president suggesting that his tariffs could replace income taxes on Americans, just days after the Supreme Court struck down many of those levies. The question is, how did the justices, who were literally in the audience, respond to the attacks on them? It is way too early for this. Good morning and welcome to Way Too Early, the show that's noticing a bit of a theme when it comes to which two presidents like to address Congress the longest. Yeah, I felt every single minute of that when I was in the chamber last night. I'm Ali Vitale on this Wednesday, February 25th, and we will start with that news because President Trump last night delivered his first State of the Union address since returning to office. He spoke for an hour and 47 minutes. Yeah, shattering the record for the longest presidential address before Congress. Trump used his marathon speech to defend his economic and immigration policies, even as polling shows him losing support on both of those key issues. His wide-ranging address included several standing ovations from Republicans and, of course, insults thrown at Democrats as he boasted of a new golden age for America. That being said, though, Trump didn't spend a lot of time focusing on what's likely to be the signature issue of the midterms, affordability. He instead mocked the use of the word, blamed Democrats for higher prices, and made false claims about costs of living. Watch.
Now, the same people in this chamber who voted for those disasters suddenly used the word affordability, a word they just used it. Somebody gave it to them, knowing full well that they caused and created the increased prices that all of our citizens had to endure. You caused that problem. They knew their statements were a dirty, rotten lie. Their policies created the high prices. Our policies are rapidly ending them. We are doing really well. Those prices are plummeting downward. The price of eggs is down 60%. Madam Secretary, thank you. The cost of chicken, butter, fruit, hotels, automobiles, rent is lower today than when I took office by a lot. And even beef, which was very high, is starting to come down significantly. Just hold on a little while. We're getting it down. And soon you will see numbers that few people would think were possible to achieve just a short time ago.
So talking about prices, but not the squeeze that Americans are feeling right now on their wallets. Also during that address, President Trump blamed Democrats for shutting down the Department of Homeland Security. That agency remains closed right now amid a fight over immigration enforcement reforms. Trump called on Congress to restore funding and then appeared to offer lawmakers a litmus test on the issue.
As we speak, Democrats in this chamber have cut off all funding for the Department of Homeland Security. It's all cut off. It's all cut off. They have instituted another Democrat shutdown, the first one costing us 2 points on GDP. Now they have closed the agency responsible for protecting Americans from terrorists and murderers. Tonight I'm demanding the full and immediate restoration of all funding for the border security, homeland security of the United States, and also for helping people clean up their snow. We have no money because of the Democrats, and it would be nice. One of the great things about the State of the Union is how it gives Americans the chance to see clearly what their representatives really believe. So tonight I'm inviting every legislator to join with my administration in reaffirming a fundamental principle. If you agree with this statement, then stand up and show your support. The first duty of the American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens.
Speaking over shouts at times from Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib or Ilhan Omar, both of them kind of going back and forth with the president at times. He went on to berate Democrats who didn't stand with him in favor with him on illegal immigration before then repeating false claims of voter fraud. Watch.
You should be ashamed of yourself not standing up. You should be ashamed of yourself. That is why I'm also asking you to end deadly sanctuary cities that protect the criminals and enact serious penalties for public officials who block the removal of criminal aliens. In many cases, drug lords, murderers all over our country, they're blocking the removal of these people out of our country, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
Let's get right into it with MS Now White House reporter Akayla Gardner here on set with me. You and I both had late nights over here. Now, I watched that speech from right over Speaker Johnson's shoulder, up above in the upper gallery. And I can tell you, you could hear those back and forths between some Democratic lawmakers and the president. The Republican response was basically just cheer louder, troll the libs by doing that effectively. But what was your takeaway? If this was the speech that tens of millions of Americans presumably were watching as the president set the tone, not just for the State of the Union, but the midterms, what did they get?
I mean, those moments were just a reminder of how divided the country is.
Yeah.
One thing that stuck out to me, only 4 Supreme Court justices attended, usually not all 9, but usually more than 4. The president didn't totally directly attack the justice in the room for the tariff decision, but he did call the ruling totally wrong. He called it unfortunate. And then you had some of these very tense moments on policy issues. The president called for Congress to pass a ban on insider trading, but didn't include himself or cabinet members. And we saw some Democratic lawmakers essentially shouting, "What about you?" He didn't actually address that. And then, of course, on the issue of immigration, the president called for Democrats and Republicans to reopen the Department of Homeland Security, but he didn't exactly make any concessions there. We saw lawmakers holding up photos of Renee Good and Alex Preddy and shouting at the president, "You're killing Americans," really speaking to why these negotiations matter so much to the Democratic Party.
I thought that moment, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but to me showed what you're talking about, the divide in this country where we saw on video what happened to Renee Good and Alex Preddy. There were Republicans who were concerned about it. And yet in that chamber, partisanship took over for humanity.
Yeah. I mean, and there was also Democrats who simply didn't show up. Dozens went to a counter rally. But, yeah, the president really didn't acknowledge that he didn't name Renee Good. He didn't talk about Alex Preddy. And in the past, he's talked about the softer touch when it comes to immigration enforcement. But that didn't really make it into his speech last night.
Yeah, that wasn't on display. And I think the other thing that wasn't in the speech that was surprising to you and I both is no mention of tax cuts.
Yeah.
It's tax season, as Republicans on the Hill say ad nauseum, effectively. Why? Where was it? It's a signature policy.
It's a great question. And also President Trump told our own Stephanie Ruhle that he intended to announce these new tax cuts for individuals and corporations. He said that they wouldn't need to be approved by Congress. But as far as I could tell, he didn't announce anything new when it came to tax cut. It was sort of the greatest hits. He talked about no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security. But somehow that was missing from his speech last night.
Yeah, I think the other thing, too, I will tell you, very long speech. No one feels the length of the longest State of the Union in history more than the person who hosts the show at 5 a.m.
Yeah.
But I do think lawmakers in the room, by the time it was over, they seemed exhausted. And I'm not just looking at the Democratic side. I'm looking at the Republican side, too.
Yeah.
Is that the feeling now as we go into the midterm elections? I mean, for Republicans, this is what you're running on now. The president has established what your message is.
You know, I remember I was actually here with you last year when the president gave the longest address to Congress.
Yes.
He, of course, beat his own record this year. Seems like that's going to become a pattern for the next few years. But that was an intentional decision, and the president said so himself. They believe they have this long laundry list of accomplishments, and they designed the speech to reflect that. But one thing that was really striking to me is how the president talked about the economy. He called it roaring. He called his first year in office a turnaround for the ages. That stands in stark contrast to how Americans actually feel about the economy. He also did so while making misleading claims about gas prices, about inflation. But one thing I heard recently, I was talking to a Republican strategist, and I said, why doesn't the president talk about the economy differently? And he said, it's just simply not authentic to him. That would mean acknowledging that there's something more that he could do, and that's just not something that he's willing to do. And I think a lot of voters simply feel better about the economy from his first term, and that's what they're comparing everything to, a time before the pandemic. That's just not where the country is right now.
Which is also perhaps an unfair metric, right? And it's the same thing that President Biden was coming up against. Well, hey, the stock market's pretty good. Nope, Americans aren't feeling it. And now this administration, instead of learning from its predecessors' mistakes on messaging and how to talk about it, they are instead doubling down on the same posture. It is perhaps why, and you pointed this out last night, as the State of the Union was going on, Democrats won 3 separate special elections, 2 in Pennsylvania, 1 in Maine. And I think that is really important context as we head into a November election that is going to be higher stakes than ever before. All of this factoring into it. MS Now White House reporter Akayla Gardner. I love when you pull early duty with us after all of these big speeches.
Happy to.
Thank you, as always.